Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. On this episode, Rhys Williams, founder of Domestique, unpacks the strategic frameworks transforming revenue operations. From demand councils to customer service integration, we'll explore advanced approaches to scaling growth, optimizing precision forecasting, and achieving seamless departmental alignment, including finance, marketing, and sales. Let's get started.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Rhys Williams, you're back. Your encore interview on StrategyCast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having us back, particularly here before the holidays. So.
I tell you, I'm excited. This is a great topic today that we're going to chat through. It's the strategy behind setting annual sales and marketing targets. Really, it has to do with a lot of capacity planning. Before we get there, tell us about yourself, your journey, and why our guests should be listening today.
Yes, no, very much appreciate it. So my name is Rhys Williams. I'm actually from Colorado, born and raised here, moved around a bunch, built my career in kind of B2B revenue operations. And then 3.5 years ago, started a company called Domestique, which is a revenue operations agency. Currently today, we have 40 team members. We work with a lot of companies from seed to pre-IPO, but spend a lot of time in the kind of 10 to 100 million range. And our team is some of the brightest and smartest RevOps operators out there. And so truly grateful to get to work and learn from those team members on a daily basis.
Well, and what I love so much about this topic, and it's why we're having you back on the show, is there are so many new positions and organizations today that are RevOps. And they really are the connection between sales and marketing. And that's why I think this topic is so valuable. And it takes someone who truly understands both of those parallel paths to develop programs, not necessarily, Rev programs, yes, and Rev strategies, yes, but to set marketing up to succeed, which I think is a big missing element of a marketer's success plan today.
1000%. So one of the things that, as I was stumbling my way through learning what RevOps was, one of the things we kind of figured out, and this is kind of the framework that we use here at Domestique for everything we do, is so when we talk about revenue operations, it's truly across that entire customer journey. So product, marketing, BDR, sales, PS, CS, support, on alignment, finance. And that's exactly to your point there. Like, you have to be in alignment. It's truly not just a sales or just a marketing sales, but across that whole customer journey. And then we think about it as 5 work streams, and the order is important. So strategy, what's your go-to-market strategy? Process, what's the day-to-day process? Tooling, so the entire tech stack should be set up based upon strategy and process. Data comes out of your tech stack, and then enablement.
Yeah.
And the conversation we're going to have a lot about today is kind of that strategy and data piece in and around the capacity planning side of the house.
Yeah, I love it. And the show is going to be airing the second week of January. We wish that we could have taped it, but the show schedule is just really, really full. We weren't able to get it out before the end of the year. But one of the important things here, when you're planning capacity, when you're, setting your targets for the new year, you're going to be taking a look at them, weekly, monthly, quarterly anyway. So no matter what no matter what listeners, this is going to be a great show today. First of all, what we're going to do, again, we're diving into the strategy behind setting annual sales and marketing targets with capacity planning. But first, we need to talk about what people are doing wrong
Yes.
in order to really set yourselves up to succeed. So a lot of times they're not starting at the right time.
Yeah. So there's a couple of like classic problems we see on a regular basis. And the first one, as you highlighted, is people don't start at the right time. And the irony about it is like, so we get the question is like, when should people start? And what, our answer is dynamic. And what I mean by that is you should technically start based upon what is your sales cycle. So we work, here at Domestic, we work with a lot of kind of B2B tech SaaS companies, and sales cycles are ranged anywhere from, call it 3 months all the way up to a year. But like realistically, let's say you have a 3-month sales cycle, you need to have your capacity plan done before you hit Q4 of the end of the year. And the reason being is if you have 3-month sales cycle, whatever pipeline you're then creating in Q4 is really the pipeline you're going to close in Q1 if you have a 3-month sales cycle. And the problem is your capacity plan is essentially saying, what are you going to close? How much pipeline do you need? When does it need to show up? What are the pipeline sources? Is it a SDR outbound generated? Is it marketing generated? So on and so forth. If you have 6-month sales cycles, but don't complete your capacity plan until October 1, the problem is like your Q1 is pretty much baked and there's not a lot you can do about it unless you run some like, oh, hey, we got to do some really like end of the year promotions or over index on expansion, which may have shorter sales cycles. But so you have to get like really creative. And this is one of the challenging parts organizations have, particularly when they have longer sales cycles.
Well, they don't understand the lag. They're not taking lag into account.
100%. Now, the really challenging part is there's probably a handful of listeners out there who are asking themselves, well, we have 6 months or 6-month plus sales cycles. And should we be starting capacity planning in like June? In a perfect world, you would, but like most companies don't. And that's okay because like you don't have enough of the year's data to sit down and understand like, how are we doing to be able to look back on it. You just have to acknowledge that the activities you're doing and the pipeline activities you're doing in the back half of the year are setting up next year. And you may have to run some plays like the expansion play that we talked about. And you have shorter sales cycles to try and over index on trying to solve for any pipeline gaps or deltas.
Yeah, that's a great insight. One area that I think causes a lot of confusion as well is, definitions of things. So case in point, years ago, I was in a meeting with a new marketing director for a client, and she was talking about digital media. And in our world, digital media is more paid approaches, social, programmatic, so on and so forth. In her world, it included social media content. So it took us a while to align on that difference there. And you see that a lot, even with the term funnel.
Oh, it like, like the irony of all ironies is like one of the number one projects we do across 90% of our customers is like some sort of stage definition alignment. And like most companies you go into and you'll ask them like, hey, do you have clear understanding of your stages? And everyone's like shaking their head. Oh yeah. And what's funny is then you start asking people like, all right, tell me what an MQL is. And you ask 5 different people and you just get 5 different answers. And the problem is, as you think about how does this relate to capacity planning, if what you're trying to do in capacity plan is essentially build the reverse waterfall of, hey, in order to close $1 million, if we have a 25% close rate, so we need $4 million in pipeline, how does that translate to the number of MQLs? The problem is you don't actually know how that translates to the number of MQLs unless you have a clear definition of what an MQL is.
Yeah. And in its simplest form, this is not about awareness, intent, acquisition, and referral. It is much, much broader than that.
Correct. So what normally comes out, and I think we're going to get there originally, what normally comes out of most capacity plan is you get all these kind of sets of targets that essentially say, hey, we need this amount of pipeline. Of this pipeline, marketing is going to generate this portion of that pipeline. Then what typically happens is the marketing team comes back to the organization and to essentially say, in order for us to generate that amount of pipeline, here we call it like a campaigns calendar or something like this. Here are all the different channels. We got paid search, paid social, events, webinars, in person, all that type of stuff. This is what we're going to do in each of the activities. This is the targets and so on and so forth. The marketing team is then responsible for getting into kind of the specifics about how they're going to deploy budget, where they're going to deploy budget, and then being able to track that from an attribution standpoint. So that's really kind of one of the outputs of capacity planning. But a big call out to listeners is, as you're aligning on your capacity planning targets, if the marketing team doesn't come back to you and present this campaigns calendar, you need to go ask for that.
I totally agree. How often do you see that there's just simply put misalignment internally between maybe a board of directors and the C-suite, and then the boots on the ground?
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah, we affectionately, so I apologize, this podcast is about to get a little PG-13, but we affectionately refer to, so there's two kind of meetings that we call the oh shit meetings. And what I mean by that is I have sat in this meeting 1,000 times. What happens is, oftentimes you'll have executives who just agree to whatever the board wants them to hit us. Hey, we want to grow by 50% next year. But they haven't done the bottoms up. So when we talk about a capacity plan, you have to do the bottoms up. And when we say that, it's like, historically, what have each of the teams done? And this is not just a sales bottoms up, but it's, hey, what's the sales bottoms up? What's the marketing? What's the BDR? What's the impact on CS? And then you line that with the top-down board expectations. So if the board wants to grow 50%, 99 times out of 100, there is a delta between that board expectations and the bottoms up. Right. That's the ship meeting. So what ends up happening is a couple of things. One, either the delta is so big that is not achievable, and the executives need to go back and have an honest conversation with the board. And I promise you, having this honest conversation now before you have it in the middle of next year is a vastly easier. Yeah. The second thing that happens is this kind of horse trading that happens. Is like, in order to like bridge that delta, everybody needs to take on a little bit of like, all right, Mr. or Mrs. Sales Leader, all right, we're going to increase our close one percentage. We think we can increase it 3%. One of the important parts in this horse trading is you need to document the initiatives you're doing based on those assumptions. And what I mean by that is, if the sales leader says, hey, we're going to increase close win percentage, you can just say that and then it's fun with numbers. But like, what is the initiative you're doing? Oh, hey, we're really bad at top of the funnel conversion rate. We think that's a function of the discovery questions we're asking in the first meeting. We're going to run a certification for all of our BDRs and AEs around updated discovery. Like, document those assumptions, and everybody needs to take it on. And the marketing leader may say, oh, hey, we think we can, with the same budget, we think we can drive another 10% pipeline. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to move some of the budget to events, which we know drives. Like, everybody needs to take that on to help drive this, the delta between the top down and the bottoms up.
Well, and this is quite frankly where a business strategy fails, the sales and marketing strategy, because they're throwing darts at numbers and they're not taking a look at the industry, the insights, the growth, the market growth. People implement, oh my gosh, I can't speak right now. Implications of an economy, consumer mindset, which absolutely affects B2B as well. And it's that insight that's so important. And I think it does take a very special C-suite to be able to push back and say no, or quite frankly, have it managed up front so that the goal is never set at that level.
That is the key right there in a perfect world, is to manage it up front. You don't agree to the board until you've done that kind of bottoms up.
Yeah.
Or you need to be able to go back and kind of like have that hard conversation. One of the other kind of like interesting points that I think you're making here is like, oftentimes, particularly from a marketing perspective, people are just like, oh yeah, we can do more, just give us more budget. But like, oftentimes you'll see, particularly in marketing, diminishing returns with certain like budget deployment. So it's a conversation like, where and how are we going to deploy what budget? And then how do we track it to see if we're on track or off track for that?
Well, and that tracking process, I mean, the AI tools that are available right now to track all that is incredible. But also, I think the intellect that it takes to dive in and have the mindset of test and scale, but truly dive in and take a look at it and say, this isn't working, this element is, let's reduce budget here, increase budget here to get to that right mix.
Yes, and that's the conversation. If you're not having that on a regular basis, in the new year, right? After you've set all the targets, that's the conversation that needs to be had. And we have a very kind of specific process of how we recommend doing that. But like, if you're not doing some sort of reoccurring measuring, testing, optimizing, that needs to happen on an ongoing basis.
I totally agree. So we've talked about several elements here that can make or break the capacity planning. And you mentioned bottoms up, and I'd really like to dive into that, how to conduct a bottoms up approach here, or, insights, because as you've noted, that's really where people are going to, that is the impetus for success, period.
Yes.
So alignment, again, is key here, especially with the GTM team.
Yes, 100%. So couple of like best practices as you think about it. What we normally recommend is when you're building the bottoms up, what you want to do is you want to take historical data to see what you've done. Typically that data is either a trailing 12 months or a trailing 6 months. What we normally recommend is go back into a point in time. Trailing 12 would be the kind of the farthest we recommend. But if you had some major strategy shift mid-year, only take it back to that period of time, because otherwise you're kind of measuring apples and oranges. So,
Right.
We'll say mid-year, you spun up an outbound motion, or you went into Europe, or things like that, or you introduced a new product or stuff like it. You may want to only look at a trailing 6 months. Look at the historical data to essentially say, what have we done historically? And then the second important part is you need to be aligned across the whole go-to-market team. You got to have the heads of marketing, BDR, sales, and CS in there. Oftentimes, I don't know why this is the case, but most tech businesses, everybody loves to talk about sales and marketing, but then forgets the CS, because the CS needs to be in there, because one of the impacts is like, oh, hey, if we close X amount of business, which translates into Y amount of customers, hey, how many onboarding resources do you have? Do we have enough CSMs? Like, what is the mix of those? Is this kind of a one-to-many model, or is this a one-to-few model because they're large enterprise clients? Like, the CS equally needs to be able to understand what is going to happen in that so they can resource plan accordingly.
And a lot of our listeners don't have the luxury of all those titles. They might have a salesperson or two
Yep.
and a marketing communications director. They haven't elevated yet to VP positions. They want to get there, and they need to establish the infrastructure to get there. How do you break this down for them?
It's a phenomenal question. So a couple of different ways that I would break this down. So what happens in most organization is everybody is doing department-based capacity planning, meaning the sales is doing their own, marketing is doing their own, CS is doing their own. There's a great book by a guy named John Maxwell. It's called 360 Leader. And one of the key points he brings up in the book, he talks about anybody can lead regardless of title. And so, let's say you're a marketing director or marketing manager, so on and so forth, and everybody's doing their own specific kind of like department-based capacity planning. Get people in a room together, build out the model that is an interconnected model that essentially shows, hey, look, in order to close $1 in Q2 of next year, when does the pipe need to show up? Do enough BDRs to soak up that pipe? Where's that? Like, get people in a room together, start having that conversation. It will take some time, but like just getting people in a room together, there's this amazing thing that happens by just like getting people in a room and starting to have the same conversation. Oftentimes people realize, oh, I didn't realize you're working on that. Or, oh, I thought an MKL was defined as this. You will be able to uncover those types of conversations. And once you have that kind of V1, V2 of the kind of all bottoms up go-to-market model, then you need to bring in the executives, the CFO, the CEO to actually have this, hey, does this align with your expectations, the board expectations of our growth for next year?
And what is the best way to set up a system so that data is interconnected?
It's such a good question. It's part of the reason why I started earlier with kind of how we think about RevOps as strategy, process, tools, data enablement. In a perfect world, you want some sort of, like, we call it a system, a system of record, right? Like most cases, it's your CRM. And typically interconnected with that CRM will be a marketing automation platform, and you may or may not have a CS platform. And then there'll be other things kind of interconnected, but you want the core, the majority of that data flowing in and out of your system of record so that you can then pull it. So a couple important things here. We talked about the definitions. Everybody needs to be on the same page about the definition. You want source of truth reporting. And what I mean by that is I know we keep picking on our friends, the MQLs here, but if you have an MQL report of, hey, let's show month over month MQL reports, like anybody needs to be able to pull that report at any given time, and it's the same report and there's no issues with filters or things like, so you need system reporting there, and you want to be able to document that. So you want to have the same definition of stuff. Things need to be interconnected, so data is flowing in and out of those systems. You want a system of record, and then you want source of truth reporting.
So I think that source of truth is one of the things that is so undeniably frustrating for many, many teams out there. Why?
It's such a good question. I think what happens more times than not, I think the root issue is people don't spend enough time working cross-functionally, meaning I think I get into my day-to-day job, whether I'm in the sales department or the marketing department or BDR, and I do the thing I need to do for that. And I'm not having those conversations cross-functionally. And we're going to talk about some ways to like address this, particularly as you think about tracking your capacity plan feature. But what then often happens is things will be like, oh, hey, the marketing team, we're getting in too many MQLs because I don't think we have a, tight enough like aperture or definition around what is an MQL. We're going to tighten this, but we never then communicate that to our friends in the marketing team, the CS team, so on and so on. And it's those types of decisions that happen that then quickly, it's like someone's made a change here, hasn't been communicated. They've changed their system, source of truth reporting. The sales team is not aware of it, so they're still reporting off of different MQL. I think that's oftentimes what happens. And it's this kind of like slippery slope of 6 months goes by, a year goes by, 2 years goes by, and all of a sudden there's been this massive divergent over the last several months.
Right. And I would imagine comparative data is something that's very, very important. I'm always month over month, year over year, sale over sale, whatever it might be that we're talking about. So first of all, let's address the conversion data and how that historical data is important. But again, back to the point I made earlier, you start from ground zero. You start without anything to compare it to. So what advice do you have for those companies that have, yes, data to compare it to, and those that don't yet?
Yeah, great question. So for companies who don't have data to compare it to, our recommendation is Wagner, wild ass guess, not easily refutable. Meaning,
I love it.
Yes, I had a former mentor of mine. He told it to me, and I've held on to it ever since. Come up with something that's like defendable, and then go. Don't spend cycles and cycles and cycles like trying to do this. Similar but different advice for companies who do have comparable data. Don't let great get in the way of good enough. Meaning, people are always trying to kind of like, oh, this has got to be the perfect data. Like, if the data is 90% accurate versus 87% accurate, is that going to change your decision on how you think about a decision? We always, when we think about data, we take a step back. Data is only important if you can make a decision around it. So if you believe in that, if whether data is 90% accurate or 87% accurate, does that change the decision you're going to make? If the answer is no, then it's good enough and move forward with it. The other kind of big call out here, and this is getting to your point about comparative data. Once you've agreed on something, be very, very judicious about whether you want to constantly change things. The number of times I see like a new CMO or a new head of sales come in as, oh, the key to this is we got to change our definition around MQLs. Really? Is that the key? Or do we need to be talking about like marketing strategy and execution, like changing the definition, like the dirty little secrets, like these definitions don't matter. As long as you understand what it means and then the decisions you can make from it, that's all that matters.
Yeah. In a perfect world, everything is working so well that the phones are ringing, orders are coming in online, whatever it is. And as happy as that makes sales and marketing, it can create a tremendous negative impact on the CS teams. How do you manage that, making sure that the customer intimacy, that customer service can still be delivered at the level that's very, very important to the brand and the client?
Love the question, because as I alluded to earlier, we oftentimes forget our friends in CS. So a couple of things. One, they need to have a seat at the table in the capacity planning process so they know the expectations of what we're driving toward in the next year. 2, they also need to have a seat at the table in the ongoing reoccurring tracking process. And I think we're going to talk a little about this here in a few minutes once you get in the new year. So we normally set up something called demand capital. CS needs to be in it so they know what's coming down the pipe. And then 3, from a more kind of micro standpoint, like both of those things I described are more macro level. On the micro standpoint, there should be some sort of process where as sales is close winning stuff. And again, this changes based upon if it's a high volume, high velocity type stuff versus low volume, high ASP stuff, but like some sort of handoff process, whether it's something as formal as like hey, here's a one-on-one meeting with the sales rep and the CSM or onboarding person, or if it's something more like a automated kind of summary of notes, all of the MedPick deals, information, stuff like that is getting sent over to something like that on the micro level. So CS knows what's coming down the pipe at the macro level, and on the micro level, they can see the deal by currently start.
I mean, staffing management is half the battle there. And as long as they know what to look for, and the budgets are there to either hire up or level set, that's important. I love this discussion so much because it's one of those things I don't think a lot of companies are thinking about. They're just taking a look year over year, planning a number, and then, probably underperforming, quite frankly, to get there. What does a bottoms up document? What does the approach actually look like?
Yeah, this is a great question. So normally if you kind of take the whole process is like, depending on your sales cycles, you start kind of like building the model. So normally what a capacity plan is, we think about this is an Excel or Google Sheets model that is a representation of your go-to-market strategy for the next year, right? Hey, we're going to enter a new market. We're going to add a new product. We're going to try and go up market, things like that. Like you want to build that into the model. This is the bottoms up. We're kind of looking at that historical, what have we done over the last trailing 6, trailing 12, aligning that with the top down board expectations. Inside of this, what you will get is a couple of things. The model needs to be connected to one another. So as you change assumptions, it flows through the model. Mm-hmm. So, hey, we add 2 or 3 sales, headcount. We need to then increase the pipeline that it's got to be generated. And then if there's more kind of close one, that then has an impact on the number of sales or CS, onboarding or CS onboarding and CSM heads, things like that. What you'll get out of the model is a couple things. 1, you'll get out headcount required typically for the sales, BDR, and CS side of the house. 2, you're going to get out your reverse waterfall pipeline targets. And the pipeline targets will be everything from like a classic MQL, SAL, SQL. We don't recommend going stage by stage. Once you get to kind of SQL, you can kind of go SQL to close one. But you should break down those pipeline targets by 1 segments. So if you have an SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and as well as key pipeline sources, right? This is not necessarily channel level, but this is like pipeline. Who's responsible? Who's the DRI for this? So marketing source, AE outbound source, SDR outbound, channel expansion. You'll get all of that out of that. And then the other thing you should be able to get is based upon those targets, the marketing team should be able to go back to you and say, yes, I can do it with the existing budget, or no, I need X more amount of budget. Right. This is what I'm going to do. And that was the conversation I was alluding to earlier. The marketing team should come back to you with here's our campaigns council or campaigns calendar for first half of next year. It's usually on a 3 to 6 month basis that you kind of get that analysis.
Where do you see trade show affecting sales lift? And certainly sales cycle has a lot to do with it, but that's like one of the premier areas where sales and marketing has to be so aligned.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So normally as you think about kind of like the capacity plan, what'll end up happening is you'll have this kind of like marketing source pipeline. So let's do some like back in the napkin math. Like, let's say you got to close, say you have 3-month sales cycles, you're building this in September of this year. So you're thinking about Q1 of next year. You've got 25% close rate. So in order to close that $1 million, you got to have $4 million in pipe. Let's say marketing is responsible for 50% of it. So they got to generate 20%. So the capacity plan will say that marketing is responsible for 20% or 50% or $2 million of that $4 million. Now, then the marketing team comes back with their kind of campaigns calendar for Q1. And then the detail, this is where you're going to get in the detailed channel.
Right.
Get a little bit into your kind of marketing attribution, because we understand that today most stuff is kind of a multi-touch attribution. One note, like no attribution model is right. So like, again, when attribution models, this is very much a kind of like
Ever evolving.
approach and then move with it.
Right.
Inside of that, then you'll want to essentially say, all right, trade shows is here. Whenever we do trade shows and, we get somebody to show up and then that ends up in a qualified op, that's getting counted as marketing. Again, that's under the attribution side of the house. But then you're going to say, like, what are the trade shows we should be going to in Q4 to drive that pipe that'll allow us to close win it inside of Q1?
I love that. That's fantastic. And none of this works unless you're communicating. And and if we move into the final section of our discussion today, it's really about tracking. But if you're tracking in your offices without speaking to everyone on the team, it's not going to be good at all. So you suggest that demand councils be formed, which I love.
Yes. So this is one of our most recommended successful things. Fun tip: if you are currently not doing this today, you highly recommend doing a demand council. So what is a demand council? We describe it as a process. It's not a meeting, it's not a model, it's a process. It is a weekly reoccurring meeting with your heads of marketing, BDR, sales, CS. In that meeting, you have a model, but the model just informs the conversation. And essentially you have all those targets we talked about, right? So like, hey, what are all the pipeline targets by segment, by pipeline source? You look at it on a week over week basis and you essentially say, what have we done from an actual standpoint over the last couple of weeks? The whole goal of the meeting is not a data readout, but it's to be able to identify hotspots within the pipeline to essentially say, hey, are we on track or off track for hitting our targets? If we are off track, is it a demand, conversion rate, or ASP issue? Because you'll be able to see it super easy. And then where is that issue or issues showing up? So like oftentimes you can say, like, this cool part is like when you've got it working well, you can go into a model and like within about 5 minutes, I can say, hey, you're off track. You're off track because it's both a demand and a conversion rate issue. The demand and conversion rate issue seems to be primarily associated with marketing in your mid-market section. What are we then doing about it? And the whole goal is to say, all right, where's it happening? And then what are we going to do about it? You track those action items. And then in the next meeting, you give an update on the action. So it's all about this kind of real time test, optimize. What are we doing? What are we doing? And this will allow you to understand if you're on track to hit your real targets and, what you can do if you are off track by any stretch of imagination.
Right. And then if you are off track, forming tiger teams, which I love to do, to really figure that out and have a deep dive. Or it doesn't even have to be off track. If you find something that's working so well, like it's remarkable, let's form a tiger team and figure out why it's working so well and how do we, capitalize on it and replicate.
Yep, 100%. That what this does is this helps you avoid. I mentioned in the PG-13, there's 2 shit meetings. The first one is like whether the bottoms up or the top down. The second one that we normally see is if you don't have a demand council, what happens 9 times out of 10 is people finalize the capacity plan, put it in a desk drawer, don't look at it again until 6 months later. And when they look at it again 6 months later, they realize they're off track and there's not a lot they can do about saving their year.
You have your oh shit meetings. We have PMS meetings, which is pre-meeting syndrome. I had a team of men who managed a very, very, very large franchise operation for us.
Yeah.
And there are about 80 different locations that we managed in the region. And they would have PMS going into the ad council meetings because someone was always in a bad mood. And it was, we'd take a look at car count and revenue, and we'd know who it would be going into the meeting. So, we would know which shots were going to be coming our way. But yeah, I love that.
But you're bringing up an excellent point here, Lori. Like, one of the interesting parts here is like, one of the reasons why demand council tends to fall down the most is people don't have the meeting the right way. And what I mean by that is you need to find an MC who's a neutral party. It's typically like if you have a RevOps function, they should own it because they're
important. I love that.
And what you want to do is you want to make sure that people don't feel like, hey, you're getting thrown under the bus. So oftentimes I'll give people a heads up like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Marketing Leader, this is not great. I'm going to call this out. If you can look into this ahead of, so like, if you can show that people, hey, we're all on the company's team here. This isn't a individual person team or individual department. Like what we're trying to do is like drive the company goals. It'll be a little awkward at first. We always describe it as a middle school dance, the first couple of meetings. But once you kind of get past that, literally the best performing demand council always has this moment. Like it's usually 4 to 8 meetings in where all of a sudden this light bulb goes on and you start calling out these hotspots. No one's getting defensive and people are just like, hey, look, yeah, this is a problem. I'm not sure what's going on here. I need help from so-and-so. Can you, and like people are jumping in and you're driving this cross-functional. It is gold once you kind of.
It's anticipating the negative before it comes out and presenting the solution so it's not, yeah, exactly. I talk to the team about that constantly. When we're planning for meetings, it's important.
We're an entrepreneur's operating shop, which for those of you who don't know is kind of like an operating framework. But like the whole goal in EOS, which is very similar to demand council, is like problems are not a bad thing.
Yeah.
What you want to do is you want to find them as quickly as possible and then solve them. Like
exactly.
What are they? How do I see it as quickly as possible? Prioritize the big ones and then go solve. Like so, like that's all demand council is doing is like this is a hot spot. Like it's not a good or bad thing. It just is what it is. Let's go figure out how to solve it.
I just love our conversations, Rhys. They're incredible. One thing that we're doing really, I think it's going to be really cool this year is in every episode, we are going to ask our guests a question about better at. And to tee it up a little bit more, marketing is about change. It's about making things better. It's about evolution and just, helping every team that we've talked about today be successful. So we do it by getting better and being better at listening, understanding, and building real-world connections. So what is your better at for our listeners today? Some advice that they can get better at to help their teams succeed this next year?
I love the question. We have an internal value of incremental improvement. This 100%, like I love it. As you think about better at, in the context of particularly what we're talking about with capacity planning and demand council, I recommend one thing. One of the questions we get asked on a regular basis is like when you're hiring for a RevOps leader or something, like what is it you look for? And the number one thing I say is like I could care less about technical ability, experience, so on and so forth. It's the ability to lead through influence. And what I mean by that is people may or may not report to you and like who cares? And whether somebody's higher up in a different department, whatever, is being able to kind of lead through them. So the conversation we're having earlier about if you're a siloed department, people are doing their own capacity planning, you don't have any demand council, who cares about like having a function like a RevOps or things like that? Like go set it up yourself. Get people in a room together, start having the capacity planning conversation, have the demand council conversation. And I promise you there's going to be gold that comes from that, regardless of who owns it. Like, don't care about the ownership or like, hey, someone's got to report to me in order for me to get like leading through influence. I like one strategy. So anyways, I think about it on a regular basis and we talk about it with our team here internally all the time.
Well, I can tell. And what I love about that too, is it's not the leading through influence internally affects everything externally. And that's why it is so important.
100%.
Rhys, thank you so much. Any final words for our audience today, and what is the best way to get in touch with you?
I truly appreciate the opportunity. I always enjoy these conversations. If anybody has any questions, one of the things we believe in is just paying it forward. So we're always available to jump on a 30-minute session, even if it's just a, sounding board, what's your thoughts hearing this? You can find us at domestique.info, or you can reach out to me directly at Rhys, RHYS, So Welsh spelling at domestique.info. So
It
thank you
took
so
me a
much.
while. It took me a while to pronounce it correctly too. So thank you for your guiding light there. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your insights and your appearance on StrategyCast today, Rhys. If you'd like to get a hold of me, please email me, Lori@strategycast.com. And also, you can send me a note to sign up for our newsletter or go to StrategyCast.com to do it there as well. Rhys, Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much for your appearance today.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.